But
Yes,
yeah,
I can do stuff.
this is a topic Austin and I were discussing earlier. Um, and actually, so Josh, you and I have discussed it a little bit because I made a Facebook post about it.
Right.
And it's based on a conversation that I had with my dad over Memorial Day.
Uh-huh.
But just kind of how nuanced biblical villains really are if you read the text. There's, human beings are so much more complex than just completely good or completely evil. And the way that we tend to read them, especially most of us who grew up in the Christian church, really thinking that they are either good or bad, right? We read the character of especially Judas is another one that we're probably going to discuss here in a bit, where we just read Judas as an inherent villain throughout the story.
See,
And
I don't get that at all. I
right,
have
because the character is so much
I'm
more
very
nuanced than that.
controversial where I usually keep it quiet where I think Judas repented and so
I think there's a lot of this like kind of Hollywood brush that goes over everything. So it's like you read a story and you're disconnected, whether historical or not. You read a story and you're instantly disconnected from reality, and you put yourself in as, okay, here are the villains, here are the good guys, and then that's it. There's not like a black and white, like a good guy who messes up a bunch and does tons of evil things. You're like, well, he's the good guy though. And you even see this in movies, like there's a movie about a villain and starring him as like the good guy, and everyone's like, oh yeah, well, he's the good guy, even though he's clearly the villain throughout everything. um and so, yeah, and I think a good example, and we've talked at length about this, is like Pharisees being like everyone views them as, oh, well, they're the bad guys because they're against our hero. And it's like, no, 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 you have Pharisee, the understanding of who a Pharisee is completely wrong then, because they were not against the hero. They
It
were
would
against, yeah,
it was first and foremost, it was their job to test and recognize the hero. Like that's their whole position was, you couldn't just come onto the scene and be like, I'm the Messiah, and everybody
right.
would just believe you, right? Naturally, there were going to be some critics, and their job in being critics is not to just, butt you every step of the way. It's to test you to see, like, all right, well, are you then? Are you really?
right. It's like,
So
are you gonna pick the a good path? Are you going down this path, or are you gonna pick a bad one? Are you going down that? And I guess you'd use Star Wars terms. Are you going to turn out to be a Luke Skywalker or an Anakin turning into Darth Vader? But like your whole job is like the Pharisees were the Obi-Wan of that, and just trying to who's a good one, who's a bad one, and are they going to go down the right path? That's
Right.
it.
right. So I have to ask like who have you like looked into for to bring up like the anti-heroes like have you looked into Ahab or Jezebel?
I've got a list here. I did a. I was like, I asked my kids. I was like, who do you think are the villains in the Bible stories? And they were just like, well, and they started like questioning whether or not people were villains. But yeah, I've got a whole list, so we can start tackling some of them. Just kind of going down. Yeah, do you want to get started?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
Start
let's
running.
let's go ahead.
I'm not drinking anything other than water, so
That's
kind of
okay.
breaking the norm here. Uh, okay, so this one, not starting off with a villain necessarily, but Adam and Eve eating of the tree,
Could you take that elsewhere?
was the intent evil?
Mm.
Adam and Eve and eating the
So
apple.
which one?
Right. So they're eating of the tree of knowledge. We'll go with that. They're eating of the tree of knowledge, but the idea of eating the tree and you will be like God, which is essentially what we're kind of commanded to do, right?
Right.
So where is the error there if you see a shortcut to the ultimate goal? Is that truly trying to be evil? Is that truly picking a wicked path? And I think that that alone, that question with the situation there, applies to so much of other church doctrines and everything else that's out there, because that's kind of like the root, like what you were talking about with Cain and Abel being the root. This is where I see a lot of the root coming from, is trying to do the right thing incorrectly.
So, and I love that you the text about it, to be a representative of Hashem to creation, right? You have to be able to see that in the text in order for this narrative to make sense in that capacity. Because a lot of people seem to make that distinction. They make a distinction between Adam and the purpose that God put him here for. Like his job was really just to care for creation, but they don't quite make the connection that his job in caring for creation was to be the agent of God to the creation, which makes more sense of why Yeshua is called the last Adam. You
So,
know,
The image of God on earth.
exactly.
so, like the way I see it, where the serpent says you'll be like God, um, also usually coincide those that with Nimrod and trying to be like God and why he was building the Tower of Babel. So would you then say that Nimrod was trying to do the same thing and trying to be like God and trying to be the agent of God, or what are you trying? What are you trying to say? Or would he be putting himself in God's position?
So I don't think Nimrod was trying to be like God. I think Nimrod was trying to be God. And there's a big difference there. And a lot of his attempt in how he went about trying to be God was specifically in the face of God, right? There was a lot of one-upmanship there. So, God built the mountains, creation as it is, and God formed the mountains, God formed the valleys. What does Nimrod do? Nimrod chose the lowest possible valley to start from, to start building his own mountain to be higher than the mountains that God formed himself, right?
Okay.
He took a direct path to trying to one up God at God's own game.
Okay. So Adam and Eve were just trying to be like God.
Right. They were
Okay.
essentially trying to like Austin said, find a shortcut to fulfilling their ultimate mission, to represent God to the rest of creation.
And that's how Adam was deceived.
Yeah, I would certainly say, because so when we read in the image of, also, mankind was created in the image of God. Um, Another way to interpret that, actually, especially the word used there, can also be understood as shadow, right? Mankind was created in the shadow of God, and this
Hmm.
is actually a great way to think about that. Is that the shadow only does what the one casting it does, right? The shadow only mimics your actions. Now, there is a story and narrative in which a shadow does act of its own will. The story of Peter Pan, right? Where his
Right.
shadow breaks free from him, and what does the shadow do when he's not attached to Peter Pan? He does nothing but cause mayhem, right? It's entirely destructive because it's not conformed to the image of the one casting it. And that's a good analogy for exactly what it means to be created in the shadow of Hashem, so to speak, to be the shadow of Hashem, to do only the movements, to do only the actions of the one casting it. And then when we detach ourselves from Hashem, when we act on our own whims, that's what we do. That's what we become, essentially, is a shadow without a body.
And if you
Okay, I get that.
follow a shadow that's attached, you will always get to the source of that shadow. It's not just like, if you're looking at man being the shadow of God, you should be able to look at mankind, a perfect Adam, if you will, and you should be able to see God if you look hard enough into it.
Mm-hmm.
Having that mirror, what is in heaven, on earth, kind of this whole concept of being a mirror of the other side.
Yep. So, yeah, I think another interesting one in the narrative of the garden too, because between Adam and Eve, I think even there the motivations between both Adam and Eve have to be separated from one another, right?
Hmm.
Because so far as what the text reads, only Eve ate of the fruit for the reasons listed, right? Then she takes the fruit and gives it to Adam, and then Adam eats, and we don't get any reason or rationale as to why Adam ate. Um, but he
Or
did.
where he was either. It doesn't necessarily specify that he was even near the center of the garden.
Right, right. Um, Now, I think that the general understanding is, because the way it's phrased is that she took the fruit and gave it to her. It doesn't say she brought it, but she gave it to Adam. So the insinuation being that he was at least somewhere in the vicinity. I mean, this is something that a good friend of mine brought up. Um, this was the first time that Hashem had left them alone.
Hmm.
Right? Hashem created them, and then he left them alone and gave them privacy. So to speculate that they would have spent time apart from one another at this point, I think is probably a bit more of a stretch than not.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
So
Your
that
wedding
also
day.
goes into like is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is that more of an esoteric kind of thing to where it was really just them getting to know one another, as a lot of people like to theorize?
Serpent
no,
stuff or
I,
Because
I,
because afterwards they felt ashamed.
well, did they?
They felt ashamed of their
I have a
nakedness.
friend who's currently writing a book about this
Really?
because the text does not say that they felt any shame.
Oh, okay.
It says they knew they were naked.
Ah, okay.
It's a big difference. Um,
But then, like, then they know they're naked. Like they realize that their parts are those parts, so they realize they have to be covered up after they engage with one another.
so the word naked there can have a few different connotations, but in quite a literal sense, I mean they surely they knew that they were naked prior to eating the fruit. I think it's just what being naked meant to them at that point. Now, the idea that they were naked and clothed themselves because of the shame is again something that we insert into the passage.
Hmm.
Um, because there's also the other existing possibility that they clothed themselves because realizing that their bodies were naked and not being ashamed, as we're told earlier that they were naked and not ashamed, they felt the need to adorn themselves, right? That this was more so artistic expression and self-aggrandizement,
Hmm.
right? Which is in and of itself another form of wrongdoing at this point, because you're again trying to modify what God created in you.
Right. All right.
adorned with the elements of the garden.
Well,
Uh,
one thing about that, and again, I have a friend who's writing a book about this. He actually submitted the first several chapters to me of a rough draft to read, and some of the points that he makes are spectacular. I don't want to give anything away, but one thing that we had discussed is that it mentioned specifically that it was fig leaves that they covered themselves with. And if you do some research on fig leaves and their symbolism in the ancient culture, they the idea that they were self adornment fits very well within the narrative.
Right. And
the
isn't the also the theory that the forbidden fruit was a fig?
Hmm, I've not heard that one.
That's what I've seen a lot in Kabbalistic writings, as well as even in my Chumash.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look into
yeah,
that.
there, on the being naked as well. So there's an idea where Moses goes up to Sinai. He's in the presence of God, face shining, super bright. You have people who are in the presence. This kind of goes more into that Kabbalistic view, but like shining bright, like the the garments that you're wearing, that your soul wears, the flesh and everything else,
Light.
basically is radiating with the light from all the positive the mitzvot that you fulfill. If you were to deviate from that, you lose that light. So if you are in the garden, you are a brilliant, shining light. You are this magnificent light. And then you deviate from your path and you lose that light. The light falls off of you. You now see yourself as this naked, without light being. Um, Thus, realizing that you're similar to that of an animal, you hide like an animal and you try to essentially cover yourself as if an animal. Um, just more on the side of the Kabbalistic or the like a Tanya kind of a view of it, but
Certainly.
I thought it was interesting.
The fingernail substance that we used to have all over our bodies.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, all that. Depending on how deep we want to go into it, but yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
like
all that falling off and
right.
all that. And then even with the like the idea of the skin covering, right? And you have more so going into that as well. God gives them a skin covering, and then the first time that we have a covenant that starts bringing people back into the garden, it's you have to cut off a skin covering. You have to remove the skin covering in order to get back into Eden.
Now,
The beginning of that covenant.
now I like the theory to where this was like the skin covering was the lamb, the first lamb that was sacrificed to cover for their sins, and they were given lamb skin to wear over their selves.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's and that's a fascinating speculation, but like so the awesome thing about the text is that it doesn't specify the animal. And actually, if
Right.
you read rabbinic commentaries, there are like wild speculations across the board about what kind of
Yeah.
animal. Some that it was a camel, some that it was something similar to a rabbit.
It could be the flesh that we're
Unicorn.
wearing right now.
Well, yeah, there's the idea that it's the skin that we're currently wearing, right? Because
Yeah.
prior to being clothed in this fleshly body, it was
We were beings of light.
something else,
Right.
right? Because all it says is that he made them shirts of skin,
Mm.
and that's as basic as it is. Um, but I do think that we see a clear impetus in some capacity for a level of sacrifice and an annual observance that was taught from Hashem to Adam and Eve, uh, because that's and kind of segue into the Cain and Abel story here. That's what we observe, right? Is that at the particular time of year they were offering these, and that's kind of where the story launches. Now, here's where I take this because I think an interesting case can be made for an age of accountability, right?
Hmm.
Based on this story, is because we're not given any indication or reason to believe that Cain and Abel had offered these offerings before, right? Now, it's obvious they had been exposed to these offerings before. Likely they had grown up watching Adam make these same offerings, but we can't inject into the passage that they'd made these offerings before. I think we come up with more questions than answers by doing that, because then it's like, well, I mean, why are you upset, Cain? I mean, at this point, you're completely unjustified in being upset. If you've done this successfully multiple times, and this one time you fail, you should already know at what point you failed and why it was unsuccessful. So the fact that Cain seems to be confused, it seems rather unexpected on Cain's part that his offering wouldn't have been accepted. Otherwise, why did he even
But
bother offering it? He clearly expected it to be accepted.
Yeah, but he didn't even offer the first fruits or the best of his harvest. He offered just his harvest, not the first and not the best.
Right. And that is the primary difference that people will notice is it says that Abel brought the first and the best. It says that
Hmm.
Cain just brought some,
Yeah.
more or less leftovers. Um,
But
this is
why
where a
wouldn't it be
lot of
accepted?
speculation can be brought in. Go
What
ahead,
was that?
Austin.
I was just saying, but even then, like, why wouldn't it be accepted? Like, if you put yourself in his shoes, which is pretty much the whole kind of exercise
Because
here with the
God
study.
deserves the first and the best. That's what a tithe is. It's your first, and then your offering is your best, and that's what God deserves. That's
So
what
But your
Abel realized.
first fruit is
where
actually the worst. It's the absolute worst.
so where I go with this is to borrow from a later biblical example, which we're going to be doing again with the example of Cain here in a moment. Um, is that difference is something that would have to be observed by somebody who pays close attention to detail. All right. So we have two brothers who have both observed their father making this offering in their
But
past. All right. A son who pays attention to detail notes, okay, dad's not just bringing stuff, but he's bringing the first and the best to Hashem. All right. But a simpler son notices, oh, okay, so this time of year we bring Hashem stuff. It's not something that really occurs to him. So we get this example in the example of Moses, right? A normal human being notices, oh, well, that bush is on fire, right? Moses stopped and paid attention to the detail. He noticed, okay, that it's on fire, but it's not being consumed. What's up here? What's going on, right? Um, so I think it offers an interesting explanation as to why Cain might not have brought what was necessarily expected of him, is that maybe the expectation, on at least on his part, was not necessarily clear, having never been explained to him in detail and having only observed the action being done, right? Because not everybody is a hands-on learner. Some people are auditory learners.
and we know Adam's not very good at teaching, considering Eve fell for the trick.
That's actually an interesting point I hadn't considered, is that yeah, Adam clearly has some trouble relaying information.
So then you go where, and this is where we talked about a little bit earlier, going to talk to Abel as a brother, right?
Yes. So, and that's the interesting thing to note, right? So, Cain's upset. He offers this offering. It's not accepted by God. He's upset by this, which tells us first and foremost his intentions were good, right? Cain's not a villain at this point. Cain wants to do right. He wants to do the things that please Hashem. That's his desire. It's why he's upset that it was not accepted. So, God tells him, "Hey, look, if you do what's right, it'll go well for you. But sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for you, but you can overcome it." Immediately after this conversation, Cain goes and talks to his brother Abel. That's exactly how the text words it too, is that Cain goes to speak to his brother Abel. Now, Or Chachaim notes that this is a redundancy that's pointless. We already know that Abel is Cain's brother, so we don't need to be told that he went to go speak to his brother Abel, unless what the text is trying to let us know is that he spoke to Abel as a brother, that he approached Abel in a friendly, kindly, loving manner, right? Why? Like, put yourself in his shoes. Why would he go to speak to Abel at this point? And also, again, just for people watching, anybody can jump up at any time. Like, but so my inclination here, all right, the my own extrapolation from this, or my own, you can call it an insertion, my own speculation on this is that he went to seek advice, right? So they both brought their offerings, and Cain failed. Abel succeeded. Clearly, Abel knows something about this process that Cain's not really, it's not clicking for him. So he goes to his brother to ask for help, right? Or to ask for advice or to ask for something. He goes to his brother in a kindly manner. And somewhere in the duration of that conversation, it turns south. He rises up and kills Abel. And then when God asks him, "What have you done?" he says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" We have a wide extreme of sentiment about his brother from Abel or from Cain at this point, right? On one
But
hand, you've got the fact that he approached his brother as a brother, right? And then at the other extreme, you've got, "Am I my brother's keeper?" What happened?
something had to have happened because you don't go from, I'm upset that my offering's not accepted. I'm going to go talk to my brother. And then all of a sudden it's violence and then a very curious phrase that doesn't really seem to fit
And
into the narrative.
indifference.
So, question for those that are more knowledgeable on the extracurricular books. Is there anything that the rabbis have written on speculation on what happened between that period of time? Like, do they have a conversation recorded from
So
like
there are a
oral?
few different things that are recorded. If you read through certain commentaries, so Or HaChaim notes the redundancy, but Or HaChaim still maintains this idea that Cain was a villain, and he says that his and I'll call it speculation because the text again doesn't say this, is that he spoke to his brother Abel as a brother, right, brotherly, in guile, right? So that he had always planned to kill Abel, but that he spoke kindly to him so that he would feel comfortable talking with Cain in a private place. That's one extreme. Another extreme actually brings about exactly kind of what I've laid out, and that rabbi says that Abel actually was kind of a jerk. That he was not just dismissive of Cain's problem, but actually that he rejoiced in the fact that Cain's offering was not accepted. It was a, "Ha, see, I am better than you" kind of attitude. And Austin made this connection earlier. This is it's almost an identical dynamic to what we see in the person of Joseph when he's with his brothers. All right. Clearly Joseph is a holy person so far as we can read. He loves his father and he's clearly studying Torah, right? That's what his father has him doing, but he's a jerk to his brothers.
Is he though?
He is. He is. What we read in the text is actually that he was
Yeah.
quite a
And keep
tattletale.
in mind,
Well, yeah.
yeah, and he also has two different visions. And like within prophecy, there's a whole reason why you have to actually tell people. But he goes and tells his brothers, like, hey, you're all going to bow down to me and worship me, which from a righteous point of view, assuming that the brothers are also, God-fearing people, which they would have been, they're seeing this as this person is exalting themselves in the place of God. Like, we're going to bow down to you, excuse me. And then he comes again and says it again. He's like, oh, and by the way, also, I got another vision. Forgot to leave this out. Mom and dad, mom who's dead, and dad, they're going to bow down to me too. So, like, you're fueling this fire and it's coming across as if you think that you're better than everyone else. It's a very kind of condescending, kind of an attack towards the brothers, but he's still telling them regardless. And that pretty much gets him to the point where it's like, okay, we need to get rid of him. Well, why do they want to get rid of him? Is it a righteous motive to get rid of a blasphemer?
Although the vision would not have come to happen if he didn't tell his brothers, because then they would not have wanted to get rid of him.
Sure, but Joseph can't have known that. That's all that's where Hashem's plan comes into all of this. But so the point to mentioning that though, the point to mentioning that, okay, so clearly Joseph, right? He was holy, but he was holy and his relationship with Hashem seems to be in order, but his relationship with his brothers was clearly not. And there's no reason that that can't be the case here in the story of Cain and Abel. And matter of fact, this would actually be an example where what we witness is both brothers have one half of the equation, right? What does Yeshua say? What does Hillel say is the whole sum of the Torah? Love Hashem, love your neighbor, right? Well, so Abel had the love for Hashem, and he had that well in hand. Cain had the love for his brother well in hand, it seems, until suddenly he didn't, which again raises numerous questions. So one thing that Austin and I talked about a little bit is the phrase, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Now, just in a narrative sense, right? If you think about the way that a story flows, the natural arc of the making of a villain, let's say, right? Or even this still works in a hero's arc. A line like that is not something that's original, and it's not something that was made up on the spot. Usually that's something that had to come full circle, right? So if we suppose that Cain went to his brother for help, and if we suppose that Abel had a very dismissive attitude towards Cain's problem, because maybe he was overjoyed at the fact that Cain was not doing well, might he have said to Cain, right? Might Cain not have come to Abel saying, "Hey, brother, I need help. Like, I've got a problem. He's not accepted my offering. He's accepted yours. What did you do? What do I need to do? How can I fix this?" And maybe Abel said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Which would certainly initiate the kind of murder born of betrayal. Because that's another thing. There's hatred from jealousy, but there's hatred from betrayal, and that's something different, right? People don't generally kill other people because of jealousy, and that's something that I'm gonna say here. Cain didn't kill Abel because God didn't accept his offering, right? That's a rather big leap in logic. Okay, it's much more likely Cain killed Abel because he felt betrayed by Abel. In which case, it actually adds weight to the words, right? After he's killed Abel, and suddenly, Hashem comes to him and he says, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground." And Cain's response, whereas before, he had great concern for his brother's opinion, his response is now simply, "Am I my brother's keeper?"
But here's what's interesting, because with that phrase, keep in mind that Abel's sacrifice was accepted, and yet if he were to use that phrase as a way of saying, no, I don't, like, am I my brother's keeper? I don't have to help you. And
right, mine was
his
accepted. I don't have to worry about you.
His sacrifice is accepted with that heart. So then you have Cain come in, kill Abel, and then still use the same phrasing, and it's like, what? Is my sacrifice still not accepted? Am I my brother's keeper? After all, that was the heart he had. So why was his? I think it demonstrates why he's, in a way, it's justifying his actions, and it's also kind of going back to the original discussion he had with God, which is like, why isn't this being accepted? Oh, well, because you're not like your brother. Oh, well, now I'm imitating my brother. Now am I good enough? It's just, I think, yeah, it's understanding more of Cain's side that you can start to sympathize with him. And then we get into the question of, was the murder itself intentional?
That is I love this question, and this is why I disagree with a lot of the commentaries that say that, okay, well, he spoke to him as a brother, but in beguile, right? He was just trying to make him feel comfortable with talking to him privately, is because Hashem showed Cain mercy.
Yeah.
Why?
Absolutely.
Why is there
flee to a place of refuge that God has set aside, which in Torah, that is for someone who accidentally or unintentionally kills someone.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing is,
and they became wanderers too because they had to go to a city of refuge, whatnot. So yeah, that's a really good
and
point.
if you think about it, nobody had ever killed anybody before. This is literally the first murder in human history.
The
Cain,
first human death at all.
right? It's
Like
the
no one even
first
died of
human
old age.
death. Cain, likely, as far as we can tell, he lashed out in anger. Sure, he had no idea what the result of his actions were going to be. Now, I've heard people say, well, no, no, no. They had made sacrifices. They understood the concept of death and what it meant to inflict wounds. The reason I disagree with that is this: their understanding was that humans were different from the rest of the animals of creation. Humans were higher beings. So it would never enter their mind to think about the human body and physiology the same way as the animals that they're sacrificing. Right? As far as they knew,
And
they were invincible.
and you could have seen it as like more of this metaphorical thing, like, the day that you eat from it, you will die. And now it's like, you're cast out. And then there's like this more metaphorical, spiritual sense of death, not that you will literally have the capability of dying.
Right.
Right.
Right. And so that there's a lot of evidence in the text to suggest that Cain actually didn't know what the result of his actions would be. And this is why Hashem showed him mercy, is because he didn't. And better yet, he actually set I would say, a curse of protection on Cain, which was such that anybody who committed the same action, anybody who followed Cain's footsteps to that capacity, would have a vengeance wreaked on them 7 times of what their action was. So that's a hefty level of mercy. Like
Yep.
that's not just yo, like, smooth, we're cool, you can still live. That's like giving him a cookie too, you know?
Yeah.
Got a lot of questions pouring in. Some of these are covered at the beginning of the uh
This will be uploaded to YouTube.
stuff.
So, yeah, for anybody, if there are questions that were addressed earlier on, this will be uploaded to YouTube.
I do want to say Dave asked the question, but had they seen each other bleed at that point? And it's most likely that they had seen each other bleed because working the land, you're gonna bleed. Thorns and thistles and all that.
So my dad actually, when he and I were having this discussion, brought up another theory that he had heard, which was that the reason he didn't have the choicest of his crop to even bring was because Cain's sheep, or Abel's sheep, had been eating them, and
Ooh.
that's what he went to talk to him about. Was like, hey man, like, I can't succeed in this environment when your sheep are the ones who are, you know.
That's a good perspective. I appreciate that. Like, wow, that's really interesting. I
But
never
here's
thought
the
you thought
thing:
of that.
if that's the case, then he did bring the first
Nope,
and the best in the form
nope,
of whatever was in the sheep's gut.
right? No wonder they were so fat. And yes, it was
So,
before the flood.
do you want to dip into the New Testament, thief on the cross, Judas?
Oh,
Ooh,
is that your next one on the list? Like, are you going in chronological order, or are you
I,
going in like whatever
it's
order?
not chronological. It's just the ones that people, wicked people, that they use as examples
Why
for
would the
wicked
thief
people.
on the cross be a wicked person, though? Although
Because the
he
typical
in
teaching is
Matthew,
that his whole life was just nothing but wickedness, and he was a thief, and he had nothing good. He was not righteous. And then he had one moment at the cross where he's like, this Jesus guy, he's pretty cool. And now he goes to heaven. And
you're
so
right.
the question is, was that the thief on the cross? Was that his story?
right. Because
You're
if
right.
you read all of the gospel accounts, there is a point at which both of the men next to him were rebuking
Ridicule. You're
him.
right.
Yeah,
That's the account in Matthew.
yeah, yep. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one to begin with, because it, again, remember what they're being what they're being tried for, what they're being executed for here. Now, Yeshua is being executed for treason, essentially, not blasphemy against the temple. That charge never stuck. Ultimately, the way they justified executing Yeshua was a charge of treason against Rome, essentially, by claiming to be the king of the Jews.
Not breaking Torah, breaking Roman
Roman
law.
law, yes.
Romans don't care about Torah, and the Roman people didn't crucify their own.
And when the Sadducees could not make a violation of Torah stick, they went to the Romans and were like, "Well, he broke your law though, so you still got to kill him."
You have to
He's a
handle it
king.
because we
He's
can't.
a king. There's only one king. You got to kill the other kings.
Right.
So if you have, and I'm going to pose this as a hypothetical, if you have someone who is labeled as a thief by Rome, this would imply that there was a charge against Rome. They stole in some way, tax evasion, whatever else. But you have someone who is a thief to Rome. However, not Roman by birth, not a Roman citizen.
Stole
So
feed his family.
also not convicted by the Sanhedrin.
Right.
So what does that tell you about his life?
Right.
Stole to feed his family.
He may very well have just failed to pay his taxes at this point, for all we know, because that would still be considered theft. Theft from Caesar.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, no, this is another one where it's like, no, when we dig into the history of this, I can't really condemn the guy as being just an absolute, wicked, horrible person his whole life.
Yeah.
Because what I know is that Rome is executing him, not Israel, not the religious community. Rome for theft.
Yep. And for all they know, he could have been one of the ones that Jesus had baptized, or at least Paul baptized, or not Paul, John baptized.
Right. He very well may have been. And
to even stretch it further, though, is that assume that it's because it's Rome and it's theft. Even if it was in the cases of taxes, high chance that they were already being scammed by Rome or cheated on their taxes, and it's possible that he just refused to pay because it's like, no, you are lying, and I'm not going to let you get away with lying to Rome. So even in that sense, he could still be a very righteous person who doesn't want someone else to be committing a sin, and so saves that person from committing a sin. That person reports him as stealing from Rome. Now he's a thief.
Yep.
So let's get to Judas.
I love Judas.
My poor boy Judas. He got a bad rep.
Again, yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I got a lot of pity for Judas. I think that especially because of Catholicism,
for real,
because they demonized Judas, right? He was just a devil worshiper right from the start, and it makes you wonder. Like it's like in their mind, Jesus only picked him as a disciple because he was like, well, one of them's got to betray me, so this one, right?
and even Jesus felt compassion for him if you look at it, because he says, "Woe to this guy who would have been better if he had never been born." Like, he felt compassion for him, like he understood like the kind of mental torture that Judas went through after realizing that he had been involved in the shedding of innocent blood.
Well, yeah. So let's think about that, because, and if we go to Matthew 27, I think is where the account is. Let's see. Yeah, starting in verse 3 of chapter 27. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is it? Well, what is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself.
That right there is so interesting because it's Yeah, it
Hang
shows the guilt. Like he did
is
not
one
intend.
right. Hanging is one of the ways that they can condemn people to death on the Sanhedrin. That's like I can't remember which one it is, but he pretty much condemned himself
Ooh.
because he realized that it was wrong. So he gave himself the penalty, knowing that the Sanhedrin wasn't going to give it to him.
Actually, hang on, because I was
So
just looking at that the other night. Let's see. Exodus 21, verse 20 is where there's some of the content on Safaria. You'll find the Mishnah and whatnot. I keep talking. I want to find the reason behind
okay.
why hanging would have been.
Yeah, I don't know
So
myself. I can't remember.
so put yourself in yeah, put yourself in Judas's shoes. You're a disciple, a close disciple. You're learning everything. You truly believe that this is the Messiah. Let's make the assumption that you believe that he's the Messiah. That's why you're following him.
Question
And
though, is it only in
it
John
comes
that
to a
Judas is
point.
bad-mouthed?
And more to what Austin's saying, you're a zealot. All right? You, more than
Right.
the other disciples, are willing to fight, bleed, and die for the messianic cause.
Right. But is it only
And
in
what is the
John that?
messianic view during that time?
Yeah.
So you have Judas who following someone who they believe is the Messiah, a zealot who's basically very anti-Rome and willing to go to war. Someone comes up to you and says, and your belief is that Messiah is going to come in, conquer Rome, destroy them, and then establish his kingdom. Someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, um, can you give the Messiah over to Rome? And then Rome is going to, try to kill him, and we'll pay you for this." Now, keep in mind, you truly believe this Messiah is going to defeat Rome. You're expediting prophecy. That's all you're doing. You're taking the shortcut, and you're getting paid 30 pieces of silver for it. Once you find out, oh, he's actually going to be killed, I had things wrong. Now you're like, oh, he's innocent. I feel guilty. I'm going to kill myself. Unalive. Whatever. I
Right.
don't know what we can say on TikTok.
So my question though is like, is it only in John that Judas is bad mouth? Because like I can't remember like because he's been called a thief as to be stealing from the coin purse and whatnot, and like I know the Gospel of John like bad mouths him all over the place. But do the other gospels really do that? They just say, like when the woman used an alabaster jar of oil to anoint his feet, it was just the apostles. But then I think it's in John is the one that was or that Judas is the one that was bad mouth because he likes to steal from the purse.
I'm trying to see if there's any other references to it.
Right, because there's a there's another account I remember reading, and maybe it's just a different translation of Matthew, but the first of all, the fact that Judas returns to the Sanhedrin first, right, and admits to a crime, right? He says that he's betrayed innocent blood, so he's admitted to the
Looking to
crime
be
of
just.
murder here,
He's
essentially.
following Torah.
Right.
Right. Right. He's turned himself in, and he's submitted himself to their judgment. And just says, see to
We don't care.
yourself.
Right? Yeah. Basically.
Because to execute him would be an admission of their own guilt.
And
It would
also
be an admission that they were wrong.
right, and they would also need Rome's permission to do it, wouldn't they?
So that's what I'm not sure of at this point, because what we see in the example of Stephen doesn't seem to be out of place, right?
Oh, okay.
They're it doesn't seem that they are doing something that is unlawful at this point, right? However, I will say they couldn't exactly levy they couldn't they couldn't give the death penalty for lack of having the whole Sanhedrin present. And again, there's a reason that ultimately they went to the Romans and accused him of breaking Roman law to get him executed.
Hmm.
See, I've got a feeling that if they could have made a violation of Torah stick, they would have executed him their own ways based on whatever mitzvah he had broken that was worth the death penalty.
Right.
Right? But they didn't.
Right.
So they had to hand him over to Roman law.
So basically, the Pharisees, wasn't it, since it was an overnight, that was basically the Sadducees that condemned him and not the Pharisees. I remember hearing about that in a teaching somewhere, because that's why they took him in the middle of the night, because the Pharisees would not have condemned him with Torah, and so the Sadducees were pretty much just finding loopholes and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the matter of so many false witnesses being brought into the matter, which, according to the Talmud, that is commonplace practice for Sadducees. They did that all the time, which tells us it's not a very common Pharisaic practice. But yeah, no, I think Judas, given the circumstances, judged himself as and he did according to what the Sanhedrin told him. They told him, "See to yourself," so he did. Right. So again, he was kind of in compliance with Torah the whole way through, and had no intention of getting Yeshua killed. That was never his intention. So again, is he really a villain?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's just hard to really say that out loud in front of everyone, because people are going to like cause.
Well, I've got a few others. We probably only have time for one more, but and then an interesting question. So we've got Esau, Ishmael, Herod. That one might be a little too long to go into. And Korah.
And who? Oh,
Korah.
Korah. Boy, that's good. That'll be a big one.
Esau.
Hold on, we'll have to do that one next time.
So
But let's say I don't know.
Esau.
What do you guys think about doing
But
Esau?
here's another question that we could also tackle is who should be a villain?
Ooh.
Someone who's usually painted as being fantastic, or however, maybe not just someone who's often taken out of context, but someone who is someone who's actually portrayed as being a good guy, but is probably more of a villain than we should give him credit for.
Well, how about someone that's portrayed as a villain to Christians, but it's not really a villain, like Yaakov?
Well, yeah,
Or
yeah.
what about Paul before he converted to Christianity and became the stand-up guy he was?
He didn't
Was
convert to
Paul
Christian.
a bad guy? Yeah, was Paul a bad guy before he
Paul was a
converted?
Jew. Paul was a Jew. I found 3 Bible verses and I posted it in my group on Facebook, showing that Paul was a Jew. He was not a Christian. He never admitted to being a Christian.
So was he doing exactly what he should have been doing from
No.
his understanding of Torah?
No.
No.
Because what we see him do is in direct conflict with what his own rabbi that he claims he grew up at the feet at said to do.
Gamliel.
And then who did he go to get permission to do what he did? The Sadducees.
Right? Yeah.
He went to go get their permission and authority to go and persecute new believers in Yeshua. After his own rabbi was like, hey man, you might find yourself fighting against God. So yeah, no, I would say Paul, prior to his conversion to Christianity, I can't even say that with a straight face. He's a villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
An
He
actual villain.
actual villain.
A real
Like
actual villain.
it wasn't until the road on his way to Damascus and then being healed did he actually start his life turnaround. So before that, he was a villain. Like the dude was like completely wicked, and even though he says like he was in regards to the law blameless, like dude, he disobeyed Gamaliel's advice to leave it alone, and like purposely sought out to kill other Jews.
Right. Yep. Oh
Well,
boy.
good thing he converted.
See, I was wondering about that question at the beginning of the whole live if we were going to cover that
I
one.
almost went there. I really did almost go there. I was like, well, we touched on Adam and Eve, so
Yeah.
we can't leave the serpent alone in this one. Is the serpent a villain?
I have that on
Now-
my list and it's crossed out because I was just like, oh man, we're gonna
Thank you.
get way too like that's gonna be the whole
hour
episode.
talking about that one.
I'll stand my ground as a firm yes on that one, even though I'm very much more of a Christian minded in that way. But even my rabbi with me, and he's Orthodox Jew, was brought up Ashkenazi and whatnot. He's with me on that whole saying that yes, that's Hasatan is actually a real person. That even he stood and whatnot, and even so, I'm not even going to get into it right now. But it's just too much of a topic that.
I would say perspective is everything on that one. All right.
Yeah.
Is he a villain to us in humanity, or is he a villain to Hashem? Because those are two different things too, right? Because good and evil are arbitrary concepts to Hashem.
I will
exists
say
in a
that he
world
can't
outside
do
of them.
anything without Hashem's permission. That's very
Say
clear.
what?
He can't do anything without Hashem's permission.
Right. Right. And there's also the plain idea that he is the angel of death that we see throughout rabbinic literature, which makes sense because why is it, right? First of all, if you understand that angels have these duties, right, that Hashem has given them, then only the angel of death would be able to take one's life, more or less. So why is it that Hashem tells Satan you can take everything from him but his life, unless that was an ability that Satan would have, which would make him. And it's one reason I find.
Then why doesn't the angel of death constantly take people before they get to the knowledge? Why allow righteous people to live and spread the knowledge?
Because God causes rain to fall on the just and the unjust.
I need to hear what you guys have to say about Haman, because that guy is clearly a villain. Come on.
So
yes,
but what he's asking for, where like all of Israel bows to him, what he's asking for isn't too much different than what he's already been essentially promised by Jacob.
Haman?
No, Haman.
Yeah, he's from the line of it's the line of Esau, right?
That's true. That's true.
And Jacob gives back every single one of the blessings. Yeah, if you look at all the blessings that Isaac gave Jacob, Jacob gives all of that back to Esau. The only one who didn't bow down during that time, and the reason why Haman gets completely upset, is because the Benjamite didn't bow down. Who was the only one who was not present during that time when Jacob's whole family came up and bowed down to Esau? Benjamin, because Benjamin had not yet been born. And the Benjamite, Mordecai, was the only one who says, no, I don't do that. That's not me. And then that's what essentially ticks everything else off.
I love that.
I didn't realize Haman was a descendant of Esau.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, an Agagite.
And trying to essentially taking back a lot of the inheritance, or trying to wipe the inheritance at a certain point. Like, if you're not going to give it to me, then you don't get anything at all. And this kind of comes from that interaction of Jacob and Esau when they come back together to begin with, whether it was a friendly interaction at the end or not. There was this gift giving and all the blessings that Isaac had given Jacob. It's even like the come close, kiss me, everything else. It's a giant chiasm from beginning to end, where you can read it through and then it's all reversing right back down to the kissing on the neck.
Absolutely. Well, that's awesome. Guys, we're going to have to do like a series of these because I like the roundtable concept. I wish more people had jumped in. That would have been awesome. But yeah, I think we'll do a roundtable series of biblical villains, and
We'll
it's
do it
just a
on
topic that makes for
YouTube.
good discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be interested to see what you guys have to say about Ishmael and Esau too. I for one like Esau and like I don't know, like I'm beginning to even think that if it wasn't Esau that Jacob actually wrestled.
Are you talking about the angel? Like the angel of
Well,
It says he
first it was
wrestled a
a man.
man.
First it was a man, and then it was an angel. And he said that, he had seen the face of God, and then when he actually goes to meet his brother in the next chapter, he says, "By seeing your face, I've seen the face of God." And so it makes me wonder if it wasn't even actually just Esau that he was wrestling, because Esau was trying to get out of there before the light came up and then he saw who it was and whatnot, you know. So, or maybe a son of Esau, like
That would be an interesting turntable, right? Because essentially, having you know wrestled with Esau and won but lost, like that's a good question too. Did Jacob win or lose that fight?
yeah, like
But
I think that was a draw.
and then insisting upon being blessed by Esau, that
Yeah,
that adds a whole new layer of interesting dynamic to that whole passage.
and then pretty much Esau prophesied and called him Israel. If he like the spirit of the Lord could have come upon him, this is where he became the angel of the Lord and gave him the name Israel.
and it's also a little interesting because Esau knew where Jacob was the entire time.
Yeah.
It's never been like a question or anything. So this entire time where he's like, "Oh, I swear I'm going to kill you," he never does. He never
He
goes
never
out.
makes an attempt
Never
to.
I think he
right,
did it
and
out of
then
respect to his mother.
possibly, but then yeah, they finally come together, and he's just like giving them gifts and everything else, and then they come together, they kiss or bite each other, however you want to look at it. But it's not like there seems to be some sort of mutual like come with us. No, I can't. I'm not going to, and blah, blah. There's been some redemption that has happened, and the story has essentially closed its loop.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's very interesting and how everything pieces together. But Esau being a villain, I would say, is um, yeah, a lot
Isn't there
further
like
from.
uh, other outside text where he was a part of also like Nimrod's army, like went to war for Nimrod and whatnot?
I've heard the he went out to kill Nimrod, and then when he comes back, he basically says
Oh yeah, that's right.
like,
Yeah,
"What
that's what it
good
is.
is it if I'm going to be dead anyway?" Because he's like, "Ah, I just killed Nimrod." That's a whole other midrash on it, but
Yeah.
yeah,
That there was actually Nimrod's clothes that he had that was in the chest as mom or whatever. I don't know, something along those
the
lines.
Adam's garments that were passed down to Noah,
Right.
Yeah.
stolen
Yeah.
from. Yeah,
Oh, this will be a
yeah,
good
good
one
time.
for. So I say we table Esau. We all study that a little bit more, and then next time, which we'll have to find another time to do this. We're doing this in place of our weekly show today, but I think we can make this like a weekly night thing, some other night of the week, maybe Wednesday night, maybe Thursday night, or something like that. We'll talk about that. But I say we study that out, and then we start with Esau again next time,